Welcome to night 2 of the United Way Town Hall series for rural communities. I'm Ashley Paramore. I will be hosting this evening. Trying to give everyone a few minutes to roll on in, log in, get situated. Welcome, welcome. So I'm trying to give everyone a few minutes to log in. But before we begin, I wanted to go over a couple of notes. A lot of us these days have been on Zoom platforms for various reasons, but we may not be familiar with a Zoom webinar, which is what we're doing tonight. So on Zoom webinar, you should only see the person who is speaking. As an attendee, your microphone and your camera are turned off. We cannot see you. However, we would still love for you to be engaged with us. There are a couple of options. You can use the chat feature down below. So feel free to say hi in the chat. You can also use the Q&A feature you'll find at the bottom to enter some questions, and we'll try and get those answered throughout the night. Trying to get a few more people logged in. Okay. So in the beginning, you're going to see some slides roll on by about upcoming events and things we have available for you. If you signed up, which you have for this town hall series, you are eligible to receive a free resource bag. So if you have not picked yours up, that's no problem. We have staff available at the office Monday through Thursday from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. If you need a time outside of those office hours, you can reach out by email to Jen Hegland at reachcouncil.org, jen.hegland@reachcouncil.org, and you can arrange an alternate time to pick up a resource bag. Our office is located in Midlothian at 208 South 4th Street. You can see the address. So feel free to contact us if you need a bag. Some other upcoming events we have for you. The third and final part of our series is in 2 weeks from tonight, on Tuesday, October 13th, from 6:30 to 8. And our topic of discussion that night will be safe prescription drug storage and disposal methods, opioid awareness, and overdose prevention. So again, that's in 2 weeks. Also, we had our first presentation 2 weeks ago. So if you missed that presentation, which was phenomenal, by the way, you can visit that bit.ly link you see in the blue box on your screen, bit.ly/townhall-night1. You'll want to be aware with bit.ly links that it is case sensitive, so you'll want to make sure you capitalize the T, H, and N. But feel free to visit that link to view a recording on YouTube of our night 1 presentation. And you can see tonight, we have our vaping and nicotine and THC presentation. In 2 weeks, we have our prescription drug information presentation. Along those same lines, on October 24th, there is the DEA's prescription drug take-back event. So these are the Ellis County locations that are participating. So you can see their locations and times. This is a time where you can bring your prescription medication and safely dispose it in containers that the police department will handle, and it's a good time to clean out your medicine cabinets. If that time doesn't work for you, that's okay. There are some permanent drop box locations at these places. So whatever is close and convenient for you, these are open year-round for you to drop off prescription medication. Okay. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us at Reach Council. If you miss some of that information, we can always get that information to you. Oh. Let me turn off my music. As lovely as it is. Okay. So the reason we are here We are talking about vaping, nicotine, and THC. So just a note, you'll want to stick around to the very end because we're going to have a drawing for not one, not two, not three, but 4 $50 HEB gift cards. So you'll want to make sure you stick around to the end when we draw those because you might be the lucky winner. Okay, so we have a wonderful series of speakers lined up and to talk to us about vaping nicotine and THC from a prevention perspective, a professional perspective, and a personal perspective. Say that 3 times fast. And I'm not just saying that our speakers are wonderful because I'm the first speaker. It truly is an amazing group of people. So starting off with myself, my background is in early childhood education. I have a degree from TCU in early childhood education, and I spent many years working with kids in various settings. And it is one of my utmost passions. I love working with kids. Then I spent about 4 years working for another prevention agency, and I was a tobacco prevention specialist. So I worked, I did presentations specifically about e-cigarettes and vaping frequently. And I also did tobacco compliance checks at tobacco retailers and vape shops and made sure or tried to ensure that they were following the Texas tobacco laws. Then about a year ago, I started here as a youth prevention specialist with Reach Council. And it was just the most perfect blend of my experience working with kids and doing prevention work. So I have enjoyed that over the last year. Okay, so about vaping nicotine. Let me turn my volume up so y'all can hear a little better. The video also has subtitles, so if you can't hear, you should be able to read, but I want to make sure you can hear it as well.
I don't think that many kids in my son's school even do it.
He makes fun of his friend who vapes.
He would never try it.
She's into soccer.
She's on the honor roll.
She's just not the type.
No way.
No way.
No way.
No way, my kid would never vape.
Get your head out of the cloud. Today, nearly 8,000 kids will start vaping. Maybe even yours. Learn about the dangers at talkaboutvaping.org.
So that was a lovely PSA. I know a lot of times people have the attitude, not me, not my kid, I would never, their friends would never, but sometimes it is our kids, right? So that's what tonight's about. It's about having the information, knowing what to look for, asking the questions, all that good stuff so you can be prepared. So why is this an important topic? Like I said, I've been in prevention for about 5 years. And when I first started working in tobacco prevention, the first year I maybe got a few presentation requests, like 2, the whole year. The next year I had like 30. I mean, it just skyrocketed. We saw that youth use spike, and I got presentation requests left and right. So it's important for a lot of reasons. This information comes from Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. And right there, you'll see that the percentage of kids, high school kids in Texas who use e-cigarettes is about 19%. So that's getting close to 1/5 of the kids in high school. So it's definitely an important topic for our kids. This slide was interesting because this comes from the Texas Education Agency, the TEA. So this is from the year 2015-16 to the school year 18-19. The orange line on top shows how many like expulsions and how much, I don't know, how many offenses kids had related to tobacco and vaping. And then the bottom line is the felony controlled substance, which would be your marijuana and THC type vape pens. But we can see, especially the nicotine one, starting a few years ago, just took off. I mean, and these are just the kids that got caught in school. and actually got violations. So no telling how many more, didn't get caught. But you can see the trend there. So just some general information. What is an e-cigarette? So an e-cigarette is a battery operated device, okay? And these are true for all e-cigarettes and vapes. It doesn't matter the brand or kind. They're all battery operated. They have either liquid nicotine pods or cartridges. Nicotine is the addictive drug found in other tobacco products. We know more like cigarettes or tobacco and things. But most of these vaping devices do contain nicotine. The nicotine is vaporized and then inhaled. And research has come out saying it's more of an aerosol, right? It's not necessarily a vapor. A vapor evaporates and it kind of dissipates pretty quickly. An aerosol you think of more when you spray Febreze or Glade or something around your house, or hairspray, and it kind of lingers and there's that mist, right? The same thing happens with vape pens and e-cigarettes and everything. It's aerosolized and then inhaled. Because it's a newer technology, it may lead to unknown health risks. It's still in the process of being regulated by the FDA. And then some e-cigarette labels do not disclose that they contain nicotine, and some e-cigarettes that are marketed, like their labels will say they have 0% nicotine, even those have been tested and found to have small levels of nicotine in them, right? Because just like with food, if there's a low-fat yogurt, there's a certain percent of fat that they're allowed to still consider it low fat. Same thing with nicotine. And if it has under a certain level, it can be considered 0%. But it does still have nicotine in it. And then there are three main components in all vaping devices. So filling the e-liquid, whether it's pre-filled cartridges or pods, or it's the juice that you pour in there. There's a button that you fire to activate it. And then the atomizer, that's the part that heats up the liquid nicotine and then aerosolizes it to become the vapor instead of a liquid. So those are, no matter what kind of device someone is using, it has those three basic components. This is kind of a timeline of e-cigarette evolution, if you will. They were invented in the early 2000s, and they made it to the US in about 2007. And if y'all remember, they were marketed as a way to quit smoking. They called them cigalikes because they looked like a cigarette. They wanted to try and recreate the same thing to give smokers a way that they could feel like they were still smoking, but they thought it was a healthier alternative. So that was your first introduction to e-cigarettes. Then it moved to the more of the vape pen style. Then the mod style, they called them mods because you can modify them. The tanks, you can modify them in lots of different ways. I've seen them look like skulls or grenades or Nintendo controllers or all sorts of things. They can be modified to look different ways. In 2014, e-cigarette use surpassed cigarette use in high schools. So even though it was targeted towards adults who wanted to quit smoking, the high schoolers became aware of the new technology. In 2015, the Juul was released. You all may be familiar with the term Juul, which is a specific brand of e-cigarette. Looks a lot like a flash drive. And then in 2019, you can see the EVALI outbreak. EVALI is a lung disease. I think it stands for e-cigarette and vaping products associated, vaping product use associated lung illness. EVALI, it's a long name, but it has to do with a lung disease caused by vaping. And one of our speakers, Dr. Glasser, I'm sure will touch on that in a little bit. And then we also saw the emergence of disposable vape devices like the puff bar. But those have been outlawed as of July. From what I read, they didn't really ask approval from the FDA to be marketed and released, and they were, and then the FDA was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We didn't approve that. So those are being pulled off the shelves. Some reasons why we think youth start vaping. So a 2019 National Youth Tobacco Survey named top reasons for youth that started vaping. And the kids said curiosity, over half of them said curiosity. 30% of them said a friend or family member used them. 22.4% said availability of flavors like mint, candy, fruit, or chocolate. And then 21.2 said they can be used to do tricks, like with the vapor and stuff. And then according to the CDC, when teens try an e-cigarette for the first time, it's most likely one with flavoring. And then they also end up using those flavored vapes longer too. Why are they dangerous to youth? The first aspect of this is the chemicals that are in the devices. Remember, at first they were marketed as a harmless product, right, to quit vaping. But if you think about cigarettes and how long cigarettes have been around and how long it took people to research and come up with studies and results that said these are the health effects that can happen if you smoke, right? If you remember back to the timeline, the e-cigarettes only came out in the early 2000s. So we don't have studies saying 50 years down the road, XYZ may happen, right? I always tell the kids, like, guess who the guinea pigs are? You know, the people that are using the products. And while people at first kind of thought they might be safer, since you're not burning the tobacco, you're just heating it, studies have found that there are lots of elements to that vapor, right? So there are cancer-causing chemicals, such as formaldehyde, which is also used as embalming fluid. There's a chemical in there called diacetyl, and it's linked to a serious lung disease called popcorn lung. And that one has an interesting story. It was discovered in a popcorn manufacturing plant, which is where it gets its name, popcorn lung. And the workers were using this flavoring to flavor the butter flavored popcorn. But since they were inhaling the chemical, they started coming down with this lung disease. That same chemical is diacetyl, which is found in a lot of the vapes. It also kind of inflames the lungs and everything to kind of look like popcorn. So you might hear that referred to as popcorn lung a lot of times. Also, when you heat the devices, little itty bitty bits of the metal, like the metal coils and stuff that are used to heat the nicotine, break off and get embedded in the lungs. So there's tiny particles of nickel and tin and lead from the mechanical part of the vape pens. And then there's also other ultrafine particles that can be inhaled deep into your lungs. And like with a smoker, we all know that smoking can turn your lungs black and all that stuff. But if someone quits smoking, a lot of times they can cough it out and their lung will heal themselves. Well, these ultrafine particles with vaping, they get caught so deep in your lungs that you can't cough it out and your lungs can't repair themselves. So it can be extremely dangerous to your lungs. Other health effects, something we tell our kids is your brains don't stop developing until you reach about the age of 25. So anything that you put into your body and anything that you do is going to affect the way that you develop and the way your brain grows. And there's research saying that nicotine affects your brain. It also affects things like attention, learning, mood, impulse control. And what do we know that teens sometimes have a really hard time with, right? Their mood, impulse control, attention span, things like that. So if they're adding further damage, that's not a good thing. It also changes the way that the synapses in your brain work, right? The connections that are being built in your brain. So young people's brains build synapses faster than adult brains. And it changes, the nicotine, the drug in there, changes the way those synapses are formed. So it is changing their brain development. Just some other dangers. Some of the devices end up being defective, whether it's the battery or whatnot. And there have been many cases of them exploding and causing serious injuries and even several deaths, including one here in North Texas, probably a couple years back. So that is definitely a danger of using the device. And then also, not a lot of people know that nicotine in its liquid form in high enough doses is a poison. So one thing that surprised me is that the poison control calls, you would think that the poison control calls would be, you know, teenagers or things like that, but the highest percentage was actually kids from 0 to 5 years old. And that's because if you think of small children, they're toddling around and they're grabbing stuff off counters and they're putting things in their mouth, and you know, they don't really know. But if it gets absorbed through their skin, or if they're putting it in their mouths and they ingest too much of that liquid nicotine, they can be affected by nicotine poisoning. So flavors was one of the reasons that kids cited that they try vaping. They come in lots of flavors. As much as e-cigarette companies say they're not marketing to kids, you can see just the packaging, you know, Skittles and Kool-Aid and Hawaiian Punch and gummy bears and all the fun flavors would be enticing to kids, right? And then, so most youth e-cigarette users report using flavored varieties. This graphic, I'm sorry, it's a little blurry. I couldn't find a better one, but it comes from the CDC, and it's talking about e-cigarette advertising. The tobacco industry, they've been banned from having like TV ads and magazine ads and everything, but those same restrictions do not fall for the e-cigarette companies. So youth are exposed in many ways, at stores, on the internet, TV, magazines, and newspaper. There are ads everywhere for e-cigarettes and vaping. And then the e-cigarette companies, a lot of times are owned by the tobacco companies because they're smart and they know where to make their money. But one interesting thing is the advertising aspect. They tend to follow a lot of the tobacco industry's advertising techniques. So these next couple slides are just some comparisons of tobacco and vaping ads. So you'll see the Juul and the Marlboro ads. Again, Juul and Marlboro kind of being like hip and trendy. This one's kind of glamour, you know, back in the day, the Lucky Strikes, and now with the blue e-cigarettes saying smoke in style, kind of a glamorous person. And then again, the yellow one is Juul, and then the other one is Cool Brand cigarettes. And then this pose too is also representative of the mega pop sensation Ariana Grande. So they kind of emulate trendy, young, hip influencers as well. As far as legality goes, the age restriction, as of last year, Texas passed the under 21 or tobacco 21 law. So nobody under the age of 21 could buy tobacco. But Texas does have a couple of restrictions for military and everything. However, then there was a federal law passed at the end of last year that made e-cigarettes and vaping also 21. So most places follow the federal regulation of being 21. There was a flavor ban, again, which caused a lot of controversy. But there's a little bit of a loophole because the federal law only prohibited the sale of closed system devices. So like the Juul and the ones that are already like pre-filled, containing e-liquid and flavors other than tobacco or menthol. So like the pre-filled cartridges are restricted, but the ones where you buy the juice and fill it yourself aren't restricted. So it did take a little bit of a toll, but it didn't completely ban flavors. And then just taxes. I thought it was interesting that cigarettes and cigars and other tobacco products have a tax. but e-cigarettes are not taxed. Minors who violate the tobacco law can be fined up to $100 and be required to attend a tobacco awareness program or participate in tobacco-related community service. And then parents may also be required to attend the program with their child if their child is caught. Can vaping lead to smoking or other drug use? So many young people who use cigarettes or e-cigarettes also smoke cigarettes. There's some evidence that young people may be more likely to smoke cigarettes in the future. So when you get addicted to the nicotine, you kind of stop caring where it comes from. And, you know, if a vape or something is too expensive, they'll splurge for a pack of cigarettes just to get them by in the meantime. So while a lot of kids say, oh, I would never smoke or I would never do this, once they get addicted to nicotine, they kind of do things they may not ordinarily do. E-cigarettes can also be used to deliver other drugs, including marijuana, which another speaker will address in just a minute. But e-cigarette use is still unsafe. Even if they don't progress to cigarettes or other tobacco products, e-cigarettes are still not a healthy alternative. And what resources are available to help someone quit? So in your resource packet, you should have gotten a quit kit, right? Or if you haven't gotten your resource bag, these are in there. And there's some really good information regarding these two little handouts. This one tells you what your quit kit includes. And on the back, it has adult and youth resources. There's websites and text-based quit programs and things like that. So this is a very useful tool for someone who is looking at quitting. There's also some tips to help you quit, and then some crunchy snack ideas so that if someone's having a craving, they can supplement something crunchy instead of a vape pen or whatnot. And then there's some other things in here like a calendar, so the person can pick a quit date and track their progress. There is kind of like a little stress star, so someone can use that instead of picking up a vape pen. Some bubbles, because it helps, you know, that deep breathing when you're trying to heal your lungs and heal everything, and so that they're breathing something else. There's a pen. There's a silicone straw. So I know a lot of times people who are trying to quit have kind of an oral, you know, they need something in their mouth. So this is something they can wash and chew on. And that goes along with like the cinnamon gum is in there as well. So if someone's having a craving, they can chew on the gum. And then the last thing is like a stress, like a little stress fidget toy. So you keep your hands busy instead of picking up a vape pen or e-cigarette. Okay. And that is all for my presentation. We are going to do some questions and answers at the end. And so I will stop sharing my screen and I will pass it over to Miss Cassie Street. So Cassie is the Chief Operating Officer for Reach Council Prevention Services. She has been a social worker for over 17 years and is a licensed chemical dependency counselor. She's also worked in the field of substance use and misuse prevention since 2011. Cassie has worked with children and adolescents over the course of her career and has a passion for working with teens struggling with trauma and substance use issues. She routinely presents to local school districts and community organizations on current drug trends and the signs of adolescent substance use, and enjoys educating families for the purpose of empowering them to be the primary protective factor in a child's life. So take it away, Cassie.
Awesome. Thank you, Ashley. I am so glad to be here tonight. I love this. I am so glad we are talking about this because I can tell you I've been in prevention for about 10 years, and I can tell you in my almost 10 years in prevention, I have personally watched so many of the teens that we work with pick up vapes and start vaping. And I've watched this trend just skyrocket over the last decade, and not just with the tobacco vapes, nicotine vapes, but also with THC vaping. So it is just it's a major concern for our schools, for our communities, all right, and for our healthcare systems. So I get to talk about one of my favorite topics to talk about, which is marijuana and specifically THC vaping. So I'm going to share my screen. So bear with me for just a second here while I work my technology. All right, there we go. Okay, we are good to go. All right, so we're going to talk about vaping marijuana. Just as a warning to any parents in the room, I am going to show a little bit of THC vaping paraphernalia, nothing major, but if you don't want your kids seeing it, you might turn your screen away or plug in those earbuds. Just want everybody to be aware and prepared. So, all right. So real quick, the statistics. All right. Ashley showed the statistics on teen nicotine vaping. So for teen THC vaping or marijuana vaping, in 2019, they do these monitoring the future surveys every single year so they can track trends and rates among use of various substances in youth. So in 2019, 14% of high school seniors admitted to vaping THC products in the past 30 days. So 12.5% nearly of 10th graders and about 3.9% of 8th graders. So here's the shocking part of this. The number of seniors who reported vaping THC in 2018, just a year prior, was only 7.5%. Think about that. It almost doubled from 2018 to 2019. This is the second largest one-year jump for any substance in the 45-year history of this survey, of this Monitoring the Future survey. All right. So much like some of the reasons why we've seen the nicotine vaping skyrocket, we have some similar things going on with the THC vaping. First of all, this THC vaping has skyrocketed in part due to the normalization of marijuana use in general as a result of kind of legalization across the United States, as well as the normalization of vaping in general from just the skyrocketing use of nicotine vapes. Additionally, that kind of legalization across the United States has made access to THC concentrates so much easier and so much cheaper in the last 5 years. I have students that they can get what they call a cart or cartridge, which is, I'll show you a picture of that here in a minute, for about 20 bucks, which is not, I mean, I know a lot of students who walk around with $20 in their pocket. Another big reason why we've seen THC vaping skyrocket is that big tobacco is in the THC concentrate game, the THC vaping game, all right? Just like they're in the nicotine vaping game, they're in the THC game too, all right? And so they produce products that are visually appealing. They produce flavored products and they make all these like bright colored, both mod devices as well as the products themselves, the packaging. So they do all that, and that just, all of that stuff, while it's not supposed to be targeted to youth, is targeted to youth. So quick note, when I say THC, just to make sure everybody knows, that stands for tetrahydrocannabinol, all right? That's the chemical in marijuana that makes someone high. This is different from CBD, all right? The CBD is also a chemical in marijuana and found in hemp, but it does not create the high sensation, all right? So just kind of so that we're on the same page, because sometimes we throw acronyms like that in the field and we forget that people don't know what they are. So when I say THC, that's the stuff in marijuana that makes somebody high. All right, so let's talk about a little bit about what's in it, all right? So marijuana products that are processed to be vapes are called THC concentrates, or I've already kind of said that. Nara said THC, that's the chemical in marijuana that's extracted through varying processes, depending on what the final product is. Some of them are extracted by soaking the marijuana plant in butane, which then extracts the THC to get that THC concentrate. There's a different process for extracting it into an oil form. Regardless of the process, the resulting product, that THC concentrate, whether oil or wax, it contains anywhere from 60 to 90% THC. All right, THC is the stuff that makes you high. To put this in perspective, the plant form of marijuana, the 2020 version on average for the plant form of marijuana, its THC concentrates are somewhere between 10 and 30%, okay? THC is what changes your brain. This is a huge jump. On top of that, if we want a bigger perspective on it, if we took a flashback to the 90s, any from time really from the 60s to the 90s, the THC concentrations in marijuana back then were about 5%. So absorb that for just a minute if you're a parent. If the concentrations for THC for just plant-based marijuana back in the 90s was about 5% THC, right? The plant-based concentrations in 2020 are somewhere between 10 and 30% THC. So you've seen anywhere from a double to, what is that, 6 times, 600% stronger in the plant-based. And then we get these concentrates that are anywhere from 60 to 90 plus % THC. This stuff is strong, okay? And that has huge impacts. All right, so let's, just real quick, how is it used? All right, so it can be vaped a couple different ways. One of them is quite literally called vaporizing. This is not done, it's not as popular now, but they would take the dry, what they call herb, okay, the dried plant, and they would put it into a device just like this one right here, and it would heat the plant without causing it to combust, without setting on fire, and this would cause those cannabinoids to be released, all right? And then another version is the vaping of the THC oil, okay? These look kind of, we call them pens, we call them vape pens, right? Is most often what they look like. They have a cartridge that holds that oil and it heats it until it's vaporized, just much like a nicotine e-cigarette, okay? And they inhale it, all right? Nicotine vapes work very much like e-cigarette vapes in that matter. And then we have dabbing, all right? Dabs are highly concentrated substance that once it's heated, it turns into a vapor. So in their solid form, they resemble a wax or honey-colored butter. This is the product that I was referring to, that they actually soak the marijuana in butane to extract the THC. So think about that. Someone's soaking this plant in butane, and then once that product is turned into this wax or this material, it's been created through the use of butane. So marijuana vapes, much like electronic cigarette vapes, they come in so many different forms and so many different fashions. In fact, people also learn how to hack their nicotine vapes to put THC products in them as well. So their looks are legion, all right? So just some basic visual differences. So it can be really hard to tell the difference from a THC vape and a nicotine vape. And like I said, oftentimes the devices themselves are hacked. The nicotine vapes, the devices are hacked to use THC products. So some of those visual differences, when we look at like an oil, you guys can see on the slide, there's an oil cartridge, that's this top little guy up here, right? That contains THC. And then you can see a jewel pod, all right? So the oil, you can kind of see, has a much darker color. Okay, it almost has a honey-like appearance. And it also has what we call a thicker viscosity. It's thicker, it moves slower. As my kids would tell me when we're in DAP, well, miss, if you know that air bubble moves real slow, it's the real stuff, all right? That's what it is. It has a much thicker consistency. Dabs and waxes, they come in a variety of appearances, but they also have a very thick appearance. They're called wax because sometimes they actually look like earwax. It can, again, you know, if you are someone who is familiar or who's smelled the traditional plant-based marijuana, you would know that it would describe a skunky smell. When it comes to smells, it can be very hard to differ THC vapes from nicotine vapes because that skunky smell is not quite as present. It still has a very distinct smell, is my understanding, but it's very different. And now they've created situations or put flavorings in them as well. So they'll mask that little bit of that distinct THC smell with a flavoring. So it can be even harder to tell the difference by smell between the marijuana vapes and the nicotine vapes. All right. So if you can't tell by looking at the material itself before it's been smoked, then we have to look at some of the other stuff that's going on. So why is this a big deal? All right, and we'll talk about symptoms here in a minute, but it's a big deal if our teens are using THC concentrates because their brain is going through a lot of different changes. So marijuana in general it works on the brain, all right? We have the THC attaches to these cells or these neurons, right? Our little highways and wiring for sending information. And it attaches these specific little receptors called cannabinoid receptors. All right, so most of these little receptors, they're found in the parts of the brain that influence those things like pleasure, memory, thinking, concentration, sensory and time perception, coordination, right? Pretty critical skills, right? It attaches and affects those areas. Those areas that it's working on, those are the areas that are messed up, impaired when someone's under the influence, all right? Once that THC gets into those receptors, it activates, in our fancy words, the endocannabinoid system. Basically, it causes the high. The high, one of the functions of the high, or one of the ways that the high is created, is it floods the brain with the drug dopamine. Dopamine's our happy drug. It's naturally occurring, okay? I always tell my kids, when you watch a funny movie and you laugh, you get a hit of dopamine. We like dopamine, right? Well, THC and a lot of other drugs, they flood the brain with dopamine, okay? That's why they like it. It makes them feel good. But here's the problem. It gives our brain way more dopamine than it can ever naturally release on its own, okay? And over time, our brains adapt. They go, wow, that's a lot. Then I must have set my expectations wrong, and it starts to adapt its expectations. Say, you know what, instead of this much dopamine, just a little bit of dopamine, I have to have a lot of dopamine to feel good. We call that tolerance, right? And so the more tolerance someone builds up, the more of that drug they require to feel good, all right? And over time, users can struggle with feeling good without the drug, all right? Or feeling good while they're sober. And they'll require that drug just to feel okay. And when they don't get the drug, they get what's called a rebound effect or the withdrawal effect, which is things like with THC, they can feel anxious, they can feel irritable, they can have difficulty sleeping, difficulty eating, okay? All of these things are going on. That can happen in anyone, regardless of age, but it's way, there's a bigger impact when we talk about teens, because just like Ashley said, that teen brain is still putting itself together. It's going to be putting itself together until they're about 25, all right? And with that teen brain still developing, exposure to THC can disrupt the development of those areas of the brain. Well, the areas of the brain that are primarily developing in our teens are these frontal lobe pieces, our decision-making, our impulse control, our emotional regulation, things that we need to have well-developed into adulthood, because when we don't have well-developed impulse control and problem solving and different things like that, our decisions are different. And when we make different decisions, we have different consequences, right? And so all this kind of dominoes together. So if we damage the areas that control decision-making, emotional control, problem solving, memory, then that has a greater impact into life. On top of that, teen brains are amazing. I know if you've ever had a teenager at home, they're real fast learners, right? I mean, if you're 40 and you've tried to learn something new and techie, and you then show it to your 15-year-old, it'll probably take you 2 or 3 hours to learn that new techie thing. It takes your 15-year-old 10 minutes, right? And so their brains are learning machines. Well, addiction is a learning process. And so because of that reason, teenagers get addicted more quickly, all right? Because their brain just picks it up so much faster, and it's just, there's so much going on. We could spend hours talking about it, but we won't, because we have some of the great things coming up. But that's important to know, because where an adult can go from first use to addiction in a period of 2 to 3 years, a teenager can go from first use to I've got a problem addiction in 6 months. Okay, we're talking a semester of school. So this is important stuff to know. So ways to recognize that something may be going on, all right? If someone's high under the influence of marijuana, you're going to see they might look dizzy, they might have poor decision-making skills, right? You're like, what are you doing? They might seem kind of goofy, red, bloodshot eyes, all right, lack of coordination, forgetful, very forgetful or very spacey. Those are very common. Some will have hallucinations, either visual or auditory. They might not be huge hallucinations, but just changes in how they see the world. their moods will change. Their moods might change as a result of being under the influence. They might have a decrease in anxiety or seem more relaxed. They also, if they're withdrawing, like they've been using consistently and all of a sudden have to stop, they might have an increase in bad moods, right? Crankiness, irritability, all right? Same thing with sleeping problems. If they were using THC or marijuana to help them sleep, all of a sudden they might have problems sleeping if they're withdrawing, all right? Increase in heart rate when they're under the influence. So a lot of people think that THC or marijuana is a relaxant. It's actually a stimulant. So it actually speeds up heart rate. So you'll see people's hearts will start racing, okay? Failing to complete responsibilities, that's one of those things that comes as we get through addiction, because the drug will become the primary thing that they're concentrated about, and other things like daily responsibilities, homework, chores, extracurriculars start to slide away over the course of time. We call that the downhill slide. And this says social withdrawal, but it's not just social withdrawal. Sometimes there's major changes in friend groups. As young people start becoming more engaged in maladaptive behaviors or things that are not good for them, you'll see shifts in their friend groups, because they'll start to hang out with people who share their passion. And if people who share their passion, or if their passion is things like drugs, you'll see those shifts in those friend groups away from those who don't do the substances. Legal consequences, real quick. So we know that legalization is going on across our country. That causes a lot of mixed messages for our teens and our youth, because they see that this is a product that, hey, it's legal in Colorado and it's legal in Oklahoma and all these things. Must be all right, right? Well, here's the deal. Just because it's legal, doesn't mean it's safe. That's always one of those things I like to tell my teens. In Texas, it is still illegal. And when we talk about the stuff that's found in vapes, THC concentrates, possession of that is actually a felony. And that's something I really have to hit home with our teenagers. If you possess a THC oil, okay, a cart, or if you possess a dab or a wax or any of those derivatives, or even have the residue of it sometimes inside of a device, that is considered a state jail felony. And there's the potential for anywhere from 180 days to 2 years in jail and up to a $10,000 fine. It's a big deal. And felonies, if someone gets caught with it at 15 or 16, have the potential for being carried over into adulthood and not being expunged from their records. If someone were to possess more than a gram, okay, a gram's not very much, if they were to possess more than a gram of a THC concentrate, that's a third-degree felony, right, in the state of Texas, and could carry a jail sentence of up from anywhere from 2 to 20 years. It's a long time if you think about someone who's 16 or 17 years old. All right. So, but here's the deal. Those are Texas's laws. If we picked up our 15 or 16-year-old and we took them to Colorado, they still could not legally use marijuana or THC concentrates, because in those states, you must be at least 21 years of age to purchase and consume marijuana and THC products. That goes back, that's in alignment with the alcohol laws of our nation. It's also now in alignment with the tobacco and vaping laws of our nation, all right? And while we set that standard back in the 90s-ish, all right, we now know that it's a decent age, because we know that that is more in line with brain development. We know through research, prevention research has shown the longer you can wait, the longer you can push off that first use of substances, whether it's nicotine or marijuana or other things, the more time you give your brain to develop, the better off it is, and the less likely you are to have problems with it. So that is the end of my little piece, because I'm short and sweet and I don't want to like pull this on forever, but I will be happy to answer questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it back to Miss Ashley, because I think she is going to introduce the wonderful Dr. Glasser.
You are right. Thank you, Cassie, so much for that wonderful information. Y'all put some ones in the chat if you're enjoying our presentations tonight, if you're learning some new exciting information. but we do need to perk right along with our presentation. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Lauren Glasser. He's a pediatrician at Children's Health. His area of specialty is pediatric pulmonology with clinical interest in asthma, chronic lung disease, and pediatric sleep disorders. So here to share his experience in the medical field, please welcome Dr. Glasser. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. You're on, yeah, there you go.
Thank you so much for having me. I'll try and be brief. This might be the least interesting part of the presentation. We were talking about e-cigarette and vaping device associated lung injury, a disease that didn't exist until probably March of last year, when clusters of cases began to appear and the CDC began to collect that data. Individuals who'd been vaping either nicotine or THC related products showing up with respiratory distress, requiring hospital admission. About a third of them wound up in intensive care, and about a quarter of those people wound up being mechanically ventilated, intubated. What are the signs of EVALI? There are three presentations. One is a gastrointestinal, where there's nausea, vomiting, or diarrhea. There's the more classic pulmonary presentation, where the patient has cough, shortness of breath, and chest pain. And then there's a systemic presentation where the patient is complaining about fevers or fatigue. We probably have missed a lot of cases where patients were showing up with either the systemic or the gastrointestinal complaints, and nobody was asking about vaping. Nobody was putting that information together. But as I say, this is a diagnosis that didn't exist before last March. The CDC's collection of data and their graphs begin March 31st, 2019. They're only looking at people who were sick enough to be hospitalized or died with these complaints. And there are now 2,807 cases. There are 68 deaths recorded, and that's in less than 11 months. The average age was 24 years. The age range went down to 13 and up to 85. If you had risk factors, heart disease and obesity. Obesity certainly is a risk factor in the teenage population. Asthma is another risk factor for more severe episodes. And in October of last year, the NIH section on heart, lung, and blood, NHLBI, convened an expert panel to outline areas for research, how to set up national registries, how we should start asking questions in our history to find who these patients were. What are the causes of EVALI? There are several potential avenues that we get this lung injury in. One is the device, and there's a wide range of devices used amongst our patients, but the key point is that the higher the power of the device, the more it heats up whatever it's heating up, the greater the emission of respiratory toxic compounds that the patient inhales. And that includes things that Cassie talked about, like formaldehyde, other aldehydes. In addition, the wick or the coil in the pens or the mods, also when you heat them up, they're made of plastic, they have metal components, and they release toxic compounds from the metal and the plastic again into your lungs. The liquids and the chemicals that are used in preparing the pods or the liquid. Again, a wide range of exposures, a wide range of devices, but about 80% of the people in the EVALI population group were using THC. 33% of them were using THC products exclusively. There's a possibility that when you use a vape or an e-cigarette device chronically, you set up sort of a low-grade inflammation in the lung. You alter the immune defense system of the lung, and that maybe EVALI is the result of a second hit from some other virus or some other inhalant in a lung that's not able to defend itself, that's already damaged. The solvents that are used in some of these devices, again, I think Cassie talked about butane and CO2 used to extract THC from marijuana. And marijuana is typically, the THC pods are typically cut with flavorings and things that will make it more soluble. Those substances often contain fats. I think the most notorious one is vitamin E acetate. And when those fatty substances get in the lung can't defend itself from them or get rid of them. The defensive cells of the lung try to ingest the lipid, and they sit there and they set up a constant low-grade level of inflammation. In addition, those solvents degrade to more toxic compounds when, again, they're heated in the coils of the vaping devices. Flavorings is another huge issue. Almost all of them are aldehydes. I think my prime example is cinnamon aldehyde. There are things that are safe to flavor your food, to go into your gut, but are not safe to inhale into your lungs, that are irritants. The folks in the toxicology lab at the University of North Carolina do a traveling show on the dangers of vaping, and they like to put all the flavorings in a little lab tray that has about 12 different wells that you put solutions in, and they put them in at the start of the demonstration. They go on, and usually by the end of the demonstration, the cinnamaldehyde has eaten through the bottom of the well that it's in. The other thing that I think affects the risk for developing EVALI is what they call puff topography. How big your puffs are, whether you hold your breath or Valsalva at the end of the puff. I think we talked at the beginning about, I think Emma did, about doing tricks with them. I think a lot of us have seen videos on YouTube where people try to have the biggest amount of aerosol coming out of their nose and mouth at the end of a Juul inhalation. But that kind of hyperinflation, holding and straining, traumatizes the lung and makes you yeah, I know something went wrong.
We can still hear you and see
Oh, you
Dr.
can still hear
Glasser.
me?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's good to know. But setting up a national registry to try and find some common causes or underlying etiology for this disease, but basically not only are we talking about addicting a young population, a vulnerable population to nicotine or THC, we're talking about damaging the basic cellular immune mechanisms of the lung and setting them up for chronic lung disease. And that, I think, ought to wrap me up.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Glasser. That was definitely some interesting information. I like one thing about our panel tonight is that we have different perspectives. So it's nice to hear from a medical perspective what you've found and what you've experienced. So thank you so much. I'm going to move right along to our final speakers. We have Luca and Kelly Kennard. Luca is a teen who used to vape, but has now become a youth advocate for both Truth Initiative and the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. I don't want to say too much about him because he's here to share his story, But he's joined by his mom, Kelly, his momager, as they jokingly said, who will be able to share her experience from a parent's perspective. So thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having us. I'm Luca.
I'm Kelly.
I'm 17 years old and I'm from High Point, North Carolina. I want to start off by thanking everybody for coming out. We know that things are weird with COVID. So we know, especially making the effort when you're in your own home, it's kind of like, oh, I'm at my house, I could relax. Really appreciate you guys coming out, and also thank you guys for hosting us to have this opportunity. But let's get into my story. When I was first started using, I was 14 years old. I was a freshman in high school. It was introduced to me at a Friday night football game. It was basically like a ticket to get the front row seats in the bleachers in the student section. It was presented to me as, there's no nicotine. It's harmless. It's better than smoking. It's a great way to quit smoking. I hopped right on board with it. I kind of just saw it as, you know what, who cares what's going on with it? I just kind of want to be in the front row seats. That's where the most enthusiasm was, the best seats of the house, essentially. So I did this, and for about the first month of high school, I would timidly use vaping, or Juul specifically. If I saw somebody outside during lunch, or if I in a classroom, wherever it may be, I was definitely really timid about it. Didn't know how to get it on my own. It was more of just a social thing at that point. It was something I wouldn't say that I would get friends by doing because it was cool. It was just something of, hey, you do this, I do this, we have a common ground, so we can talk about it. So it was definitely just like a bridge to form relationships, and it was not a healthy one at all. So this started after the month. I got one on my own. Still timid though, didn't quite have the money to afford it all the time. I wanted to save it because I also didn't know how to get it easy access. So I would go through about a pod a week. And one Juul pod is equivalent to 20 cigarettes worth of nicotine. But very quickly I started to figure out, how to get it on my own, how to figure out how to do it easily, get it for cheaper and whatnot. I would start to go through 4 pods every single day, 3 months after getting my own, which is a considerable amount of nicotine to go through your body a day, about 80 cigarettes worth. And if I didn't have my own stuff, I would go out and I would use everybody else's. I was definitely that kid or that freshman that would go around to every senior car in the senior parking lot and knock on the window and say, "How do you have it?" They'd say no. I'd get mad, go to the next car. And that's really how it was in parking lots, or if it was in the classrooms or whatever it may be if I didn't have my own. So I was not also using my own stuff. I was using everybody else's, which I can only imagine how gross that would be. If somebody else is sick, get their sicknesses and also use the vaping. However, this was an expensive habit. It was about $150 a week at the time. Unfortunately, vaping is considerably cheaper now compared to 2017 when I was first doing it. So this $150 a week at 14 and 15 years old, it's pretty expensive, especially really for anybody, really. And I had no job, I had no income, I was quite blatantly broke. So what I would do to afford this was I would sell my personal belongings, my clothing, my shoes, my family's personal belongings. I would go to thrift shops, I would buy stuff, I would sell stuff. That's how I would afford it. So it was definitely out of control, and I didn't even see it that way. Before vaping, I was a straight A student, played 2 sports, was in Boy Scouts. I quit all of that stuff. My grades started to deteriorate very, very slowly at first for my freshman year, but definitely very surely after. I became nearly a dropout of high school. I wouldn't want to say because of vaping, but I would definitely say that vaping specifically became my focus. I didn't really care about getting that classwork done in the classroom. It was just, hey, how do I hide from the teacher and get this hit? And escaping the classroom, going to the bathroom, the library, whatever it may be. So my focus was not school at that point. And that continued throughout my freshman year, and then that stayed my sophomore year. But it wasn't until my sophomore year that I started to experience, very significantly noticeable health issues. I had a grand mal seizure for 6 minutes from vaping in September of 2018, my sophomore year. And that was also accompanied by an inflamed chest wall from vaping. And, this is the only seizure I've ever had. I've never had one before, never had one after. I had nothing else in my system, so no, I did not have THC. I was not interested in THC and dab pens. That really wasn't around at the time. So it was purely just nicotine. Um, that's a pretty significant thing that happened to you. If you definitely, whether you have seizures normally or whether you don't, it's definitely significant, and it had so many adverse effects that could have happened. Um, I kind of took that for granted that I was in good health after that, but people around me definitely recognized like, hey, there's something going on with him. But most of all, definitely my parents. So, they've tried these therapies I've been doing for all my high school career to get me off vaping. We've tried everything. We've gone to school counselors, family counselors, psychiatrists, therapists. Nothing's working. And now he's having a seizure. His grades are still slipping. He's angry all the time. What else is there left to do besides jail or death? So 2 months later in October, my mom and my dad, they sent me to rehab in California for 39 days. It was presented to me though the night before I left. They said, pack your bags, 3:30 in the morning. You're going to California. You're going to be there for 8 days. I laughed at them. I was like, what an empty threat. You guys are crazy. It was a very full threat. It was loaded. It was there. 8 days became 39. The program was aimed for between 35 and 45 days and potentially 90. But my parents, they weren't going to tell me that. I would have never gotten on the plane. So I don't encourage lying, but just a little sprinkle on top of the truth, I guess, can be okay if it's saving somebody. So thank you for getting me good with that one. But yeah, those 39 days in rehab were definitely some of the hardest times of my entire life. Constantly having to sit in your own skin was just incredibly uncomfortable. You have so many lack of privileges that you would just think are human rights, like being able to contact your family members or your friends whenever and however long you want, the freedom of having your own personal space and not being watched by somebody, being able to get water, use the bathroom when you want it. A lot of this stuff was definitely stripped from you in there, and like just normal accommodations like music or entertainment, you don't have, and if you do, you have to really try hard to earn. So yeah, it was definitely a surreal experience to be there for 39 days away from everybody. And since then, I've been sober from all substances. But getting out of rehab was incredibly difficult. Going back into a society as a teenager, especially where you have no clue what's going on and nobody really knew what happened to you. So they just kind of remember you as the same person you were before. And they didn't change along when you did change. So in a way I was ahead of people, but yeah, I still felt behind. It was definitely really hard because of the people's responses in my area. They were not understanding. They would try to get me to relapse. They would ridicule me. They would call me names. They would send me death threats, tell me to kill myself. They would publicly shun me. They would throw vaping devices in my backpack at school. They would blow it in my face. It was definitely pretty vulgar stuff that was happening to me. It wasn't just from, teenagers. It was coming from teachers in classrooms, or it was coming from their parents, whether they were giving me weird looks or just flat out saying rude stuff to me or about my family. So it was definitely a surreal experience, but thankfully I was able to hold strong throughout that end of my sophomore year. And I've continued to do what I do right now today, and I've been speaking about it ever since.
I think you should share, since there will be some viewers who deal with students.
Oh yeah.
Share what you tell students. This is very helpful information.
What I tell students is that you're not going to be around your peers for very long. If you're in middle school, 3 to 4 years. If you're in high school, maybe 4 years. Then after that, you're going to split apart. And even then, when you're in that curriculum, I promise you're going to have a lot less friends from the beginning of your school experience to the end. So why are you trying to fit in with these people? They just fluctuate. Also, when you try to be somebody else and do stuff that other people are doing, you become a lot less unique of a person. And I personally would find you very dull if you're just like everybody else, and I'm more likely to move on from you. So I tell people just to be themselves. It sounds so cliche, but it really is the truth. Everybody's unique in their own way, so why try and spoil that? And I also tell students that, there's way healthier alternatives than what you're doing. I always ask the question of, do you want the best for yourself? Of course, everybody wants the best for themselves. We all want to be successful. We want to be healthy. We want to be happy. And then I ask them, do you really think that what you're doing is the best for yourself? And most of the times it's no, and sometimes they don't want to admit it, so they'll say yes stubbornly. It kind of gets them thinking. So always asking them questions that makes them question themselves. So if we directly told them, like, this is bad for you, they're probably like, no, it's not. They're always going to be in self-defense. So constantly just bringing up questions that they have to ask themselves. It'll really help them realize what's going on more than anybody can help them realize it.
Well, thank you so much. That was fascinating story and such great advice for young kids who might be going through the same thing. To hear it from another youth perspective is so powerful for them. So Kelly, as a parent, how did you guys learn that Luca was vaping? What kind of caught you on to what he was doing?
Well, he told us.
Yeah.
And, this was 3 years ago, and he had been caught smoking cigarettes occasionally during the summer with Boy Scouts. And so he came to us and said, I'm vaping, but I want to do it to quit smoking cigarettes. Well, I immediately got on the internet, and I had never heard of Juul, and looked it up, spelled it wrong, and looked up vaping and anything I could. And everything I found said that it's a healthier alternative to smoking and a good way to quit smoking. So we gave him a week to use that to wean himself off cigarettes. And after that first week, we were just like, no, this was a mistake. We were finding Juul pods everywhere. And by then we had already seen the change in his personality. So he was already addicted. It happened quick.
Okay, that's interesting because as we mentioned, e-cigarettes were used as or marketed as kind of a quit aid, but you really think, okay, what 14-year-old is smoking cigarettes? Like, they don't have to quit smoking, they're 14, but there are kids out there who do get their hands on cigarettes and who do start that early. So that's an interesting perspective. What signs as a parent do you think parents should watch out for?
Major personality changes, and quick, overnight. They go from being one person that you raised and loved to next day it's a stranger living in your house with explosive rage. And by explosive rage, I don't mean just yelling and getting mad about little things. I'm talking kicking in doors because there's a curfew or because we've taken a Juul away.
Yeah.
So, and it was huge and it happened fast. We at first didn't even attribute it to vaping. We thought it was maybe a psychiatric issue, but it happened so fast. So, it took us a while to figure it out that it was related to vaping. But, all the downhill slide that Cassie referred to, same thing that goes with other substance abuse, and lying, stealing, grades plummeting to Fs. Total change. So.
And this has been 4 years since I started.
Was it 4 years?
That's a freshman and I'm a senior now. Okay. So 2016, 2014.
3 or 4 years.
She forgets I'm a senior. I just like bragging about it.
3 or 4 years. What advice do you have for parents if they think their kids are vaping? If they suspect something, what do you think they should do?
They need to determine if their child is addicted or if they've just experimented. If they're just experimenting and haven't become addicted yet, they need to stop it as fast as they can before more damage is done. And, I would recommend all kinds of consequences. Once a kid's addicted, though, punishment, consequences, there's natural consequences, but punishment doesn't do a thing for an addict. They didn't choose to become an addict and they have no control over it. So that's when I recommend people start at the bottom, talk to their family physician or pediatrician, and find a substance abuse counselor or a therapist who deals in addiction, and then move up and hopefully find some help along the way.
Yeah.
A lot of the parents I hear from, their kids have already gone through all the steps though, and they're desperately searching for inpatient treatment. And it does escalate to that pretty quickly. Mm-hmm.
And that's something I found very interesting too, because you think of treatment for harder drugs. It's fascinating to me. And I know other kids besides Luca, there are treatment places available for nicotine addiction. So how did you...
When you think about 160 cigarettes worth of nicotine being taken in per day by a child, it becomes a substance abuse issue and needs to be treated the same as substance abuse problems.
Also, when in terms of kids going to treatment for substance abuse, you'll go, and so I was treated for just substance abuse. Everybody in there was for different things. Some kids were in there for methamphetamine. Some kids were in there for alcohol or, marijuana, whatever it may be. But alongside all of it, they were in there. They had a nicotine addiction. And unfortunately, a lot of, places and therapies are going to tell you substitute nicotine because nicotine is technically the only substance you can use and still be considered sober by NA and AA associated groups because it's not a mind-altering substance when you use it. So that's why you see such high, most people that go to AA are recovered alcoholics. They don't die from alcoholism. They die from a nicotine addiction, smoking related illnesses because they beat this hard addiction and they go straight to nicotine, and unfortunately that kills them off. So it's definitely a reformation that we need to make within the therapies.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. I want to know, we're creeping closer and closer to 8 o'clock. So I know we want to do kind of a panel style Q&A at the end if we have any questions. I haven't seen any come through in the chat quite yet, but I have one in the QA session, the QA feature that says, as a physician, what recommendations does Dr. Glasser have for parents as a physician? Make sure you take your mic. There you go.
Oop, sorry.
You're good. We can hear you now.
Okay. Recommendations about how to talk to their child about vaping or get this. I think it depends on your style of communication, but I think you have to make kids aware of the risks, the toxicity, the addiction potential, especially the effect of nicotine on developing brains. I think Cassie talked about that. It's a toxic substance, especially the younger you are. The younger you are, the easier it is to get addicted. The stronger the addiction is. Hard to sell that to kids sometimes. But I think speaking to them plainly, making sure that you personally keep a tobacco-free household and lifestyle. Nothing kills that kind of effort faster than hypocrisy. And if you're truly dealing with somebody who's addicted, it's a long voyage and it's an illness.
Okay, thank you so much. I haven't seen any other questions or anything come through the chat or the Q&A feature. If you are attending, make sure you've selected all panelists and attendees. If you want people to see your comments, but us as panelists, we can see them. If you have any questions after our presentation ends, you can always contact Reach Council and we will answer any questions that come up.
Ashley, can I add on to what Dr. Glasser said?
Absolutely.
Because he made an excellent point. You do talk about it, but I think you start early and you talk often, and it's not like long lectures, when you start seeing the problem. It's, we have Red Ribbon Week coming up in October, and parents will always get on like, oh my gosh, why do I have to find crazy socks and whatnot? But it's conversations like, hey, do you know why you do Red Ribbon Week? And you start these conversations early and set, just like you said, those expectations. And it's a conversation that goes throughout childhood so that those expectations are set early on. So they're so well ingrained that it's harder to overcome, or harder, back that up, they have more protective factors built up. So when that first opportunity comes up, they're slightly more likely to say no. That doesn't mean it's foolproof, because we just lay the foundations as parents, right? And we're going to do the best we can do no matter what. And then we're going to try to build those foundations. And then when they get to those ages, we have to go, okay, you're going to make your decisions, and we hope and cross our fingers. But one of those things, because parents are the #1 protective factor for youth, is having those conversations early on. And we know, we can see that Kelly, she was an awesome protective factor for Luca, because she researched and said, okay, we give you a week. All right. And then when she found out there was a problem, she set the expectation and she did something about it, right? That's the flip side of it when you get into the other side, when you go realize, okay, now we got an issue, is to say something and then actually do it, right? So there's that two-piece thing. And Yeah, talk early, talk often, not the long lectures, because we know if you've ever had a young person in your house, they shut down when you lecture them. It's the conversations over, did you see that thing on TV? Or what do you think about so-and-so who does that? What do you know that happens? Like they just those conversations that just kind of start just wearing them down with little drips of water at a time. So that's what you do in prevention in anything, any type of prevention, whether it's substance use or other stuff. So there you go.
I do want to hear, there's a question that came through from Luca's perspective as a youth. What is helpful or impactful to a youth coming from an adult? What can we say or what can we do that'll better reach you?
Definitely just talking to me as if you're, talking to one of your friends, just because I'm a teenager or if I'm younger doesn't mean that I can't have the same ability to have a conversation. I think there's a lot of times where when people have a lot more wisdom, we tend, our mentorship, we kind of think, like, I already know what they're going to say. So we kind of skip ahead. So just really showing genuine interest and genuine concern, even if sometimes you may not have it. Yeah, so just always showing genuine interest and concern, and always asking questions like why, or using the you, or not, I'm sorry, not using you, using I statements and we statements, because as soon as you start to say you, like if I said, you're really looking at me funny, someone's gonna be like, no, I'm not, what are you talking about? Whereas if I were to say, I really feel as if that you're giving, that right now there's this odd visual vantage point that we have going on, I don't know what's going on here, they're gonna be a lot more willing to talk about it. So using I statements and we statements instead of you statements, because as soon as we start saying you, it makes them draw back. Yeah, so just genuine concern and interest, and then also showing acceptance, letting them know that, even though I may not agree with what you're doing and I may not support your actions or the behavior, I still support you as a person. And I still think that you're fantastic despite your differences and your mistakes. Letting them know that there's not any judgment.
Yes, those I statements are critical. And I've always heard as parents, we want to come at them, not like a, hey, we need to have a talk, sit down, this is serious, but more of a, try and find those times of opportunities to have a conversation and take advantage of that. So we just have about 5 minutes left. So I'm going to go ahead. We have our HEB gift card drawing. But first, I want to thank all of our panelists for being here and imparting such wisdom. Like I said, I love that we covered kind of the professional aspect and the prevention aspect and the personal aspect and around this issue. I think that was super important, and hopefully y'all learned some interesting tidbits of advice. So let's see here. We're going to do our HEB gift card drawing. Remember, we have 4 to give away tonight. So these gift cards are $50. If you are one of the winners, make sure we will reach out to you. We will contact you regarding claiming your gift cards. So winner number 1, Patricia Christensen. Patricia Christensen, you are our lucky winner number 1. Okay. Number 2, Doug Bircher. Doug Bircher, you are lucky winner number 2. We got 2 more. Kim Hallam. Kim Hallam, you are our 3rd winner. By the way, if you win, pick me up some milk and goodies at HEB. No, I'm just kidding. HEB is amazing. I love shopping at HEB. So these are amazing prizes. $50, that goes a long way. And our 4th and final, Gilbert Gutierrez. Gilbert Gutierrez, you are our final gift card winner. So again, we will contact you regarding how to claim your prize. So that about wraps us up. We have an evaluation for you guys. I know I loved hearing all the information presented. Hopefully you guys did too. There are several ways that you can access the evaluation for this webinar. One is you can scan the QR code you see on your screen with your phone, and it should pull it up on your phone for you. There's also a link down at the bottom, a website, bit.ly/reach vaping. And remember, those bit.ly links are case sensitive. So reach is in all caps, bit.ly/reach in all caps, and then lowercase vaping. Also, automatically, a little tab should pop up in your browser after this is over. If it hasn't already, there should be one that automatically pops up. And also you'll be sent a thank you, a follow-up email, and it should be included in there as well. On the evaluation, remember we can send you a certificate of participation for tonight. So if that's something you'll need, at the very end, you'll want to put your email address. We make sure we can get that to you guys. We want to thank our sponsor, United Way of West Ellis County, for helping us put on this town hall series. Remember, our next one is in 2 weeks, October 13th from 6:30 to 8, and it's about prescription drugs, disposal and safety. Thank you again to our panelists. We did our HEB drawing. Yay to all of our winners. And y'all are free to log off. I'm going to put that evaluation link up there for another minute or so. Thank y'all so much. I hope y'all had an amazing night.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Luca and Kelly. We appreciate you guys coming out. And Dr. Glasser, it was fabulous.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
It's a
you.
pleasure.
Thank you.